Have you ever wondered about the intersection of communications, GRC, compliance, and eSpace? Well, find out in this episode where I interview Ryan Lougheed. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm thrilled today to have Ryan Lougheed with me. Ryan, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tom.
So, Ryan, could you tell us a little bit about your professional background and your current role?
Yeah. So a little bit on my background. I have been working kind of in the GRC space for about 12 years now. I started out my career at a medical device company implementing a GRC platform. So we went through and did vendor and compliance and risk and kind of those use cases and built those in. And then, unfortunately, based on a reduction in force, I took a job at a startup consulting company to, kind of run that GRC practice and do GRC consulting. So for about 10 years, I was a GRC consultant. I've laid out many, many different programs from governance, risk, compliance programs, vendor programs, vulnerability management, SOC programs, things like that. And really all of those kind of use cases all wrapped up into a platform, usually a GRC platform. Sometimes it was a different platform based on the use case, but really, kind of took my career, kind of down that path, right? And after a while, about 8 years in or so, I became the director of professional services there. I was able to run kind of that team and that program, and then I was looking for something new, and that's where I landed here at Onspring. So for about 2 years now, I've been the director of platform. And what that means is that, my main responsibilities is creating requirements based on like enhancements from our clients, as well as, other places that we're seeing in the industry, running the kind of the platform side of the house. So, running releases, running hot fixes or patches, things like that if we need to. Um, and then just kind of the general all release management of the platform.
Can I maybe take a step back and ask you what
Yeah,
is OnSpring and what do you guys provide?
yeah, yeah. So Onspring is a SaaS GRC platform or a business process automation platform. We provide a couple different things. First, the platform itself. So we are an automation platform, a low code, no code platform. So we're able to automate, steps in business processes and use cases and things like that. And then we also too offer out of the box products. So, really thinking about those use cases, compliance management, risk management, and we have that for a wide array of maturities. So, with companies that, potentially aren't very mature in those areas, we have products for that. And then also for mature companies as well. And then really kind of that platform and product together, we're very configurable. So we're able to do really anything that you set your mind to in that sense. And then outside of that, we do have some services where we do API integrations and like use case rollouts and things like that.
Ryan, every compliance professional I know, literally from a company with one product who may think they only have to comply with a small number of laws to the multinationals that you deal with on a regular basis, always has the concern about how do I keep abreast of current regulations in my field? How do I know what I'm doing today fulfills the legal and regulatory compliance requirements, and how can I have a unified environment where I'm comfortable that I can advise the business? How does OnSpring really help with that, create that unified environment for the compliance professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I think about OnSpring, I think about kind of a central platform where a lot of teams are working in, right? And compliance is definitely going to be one of those. And when you think about regulations and maintaining those, you usually are working with some sort of regulatory source, right? So that could be based on your industry, that could be PCI, it could be healthcare, it could be all the way down the line, right? SOX, et cetera. Um, and then with what Onspring will do is that, based on these contents, we can go out and get that information and pull that into a centralized source for you, and work with different integration partners to bring that content in. So like these partners out there, they will continuously keep regulations updated for you, create alerts, things like that. Onspring will go out and grab that information and bring it back in, and then alert your team, hey, uh, this control has changed, or this citation regulation has changed. Uh, please review, right, and kind of go through that regulatory management process there. And then kind of outside of bringing that together, you could talk about looking at things like gap analysis, right, and how to link these controls together, like going with something that's like a little bit of a unified compliance framework, right? Like we are partners with the UCF, so we do bring that in. But when you think about linking these regulations together and taking a look at a gap analysis, it's I want to bring in this new reg that just came down. Do we already support these controls? Do we not? Where do we need to go from there?
That's a pretty sophisticated analysis where you can look at a new reg and see if you have the controls in place to meet it, or if you need to create a new control or perhaps even modify existing controls. How do you help a compliance professional think through that process?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that all goes kind of back to, here's the regulation, here's maybe the controls that are inside of your internal environment. And when you bring those things into Onspring, you're bringing in those controls into a place that has a common language, right? So you're talking about citations and control names, right? Like those become one. And talking about descriptions and things like that. So when you take a look at those regulations and your internal controls or your policy statements and things like that, you can start to see similar language. And then with Onspring, you're able to map those together through relationships. And then through those relationships is where you're really going to leverage that reporting and say, hey, of the 20 regulations here, how many internal controls do I have tied to those? And then you can see your gaps pretty easily from there. Granted, that's a pretty simplified view, and it takes a long time to get there, but that's something that is a complete end case for us.
So in 2017, for my sins, I created a spreadsheet where I took the COSO internal controls framework, 5 objectives, 17 principles, 84 points of focus, and mapped it against the then 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program with 3 key KPIs for each hallmark. And it was a very, very, very large spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
My sense is you've evolved a little bit past that. And but in 2015, that was revolutionary in terms of a gap analysis around corruption compliance professionals. What you've described is almost, I don't want to say continuous controls monitoring, but maybe continuous gap analysis, and it allows a compliance professional to keep anything really from slipping through the cracks.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And then if you leverage some of those content partners out there and bring that information in, you have somebody else that's going out there and looking for updates for you and packaging those alerts into the platform. And then you're using workflow, to kind of define that regulatory change management process for you.
Let's talk about workflow then, because I advocate that effective compliance actually makes your business more efficient, because I believe good compliance is essentially good controls, and whether it's financial controls or other. But having that process where you can look at your gaps and, more importantly, have a workflow for it is so critical. When you sit down with a GRC professional or even chief compliance officer, are they a lawyer like me who may or may not understand workflow, where you're really having to educate it, or has the market matured, or at least your client base matured enough that you can move a little bit further down in your discussions with them?
Yeah. So I'm going to give the consulting answer here, and that it depends, right? It really does. It really depends on where the client is at in their maturity, where the background of that individual is, in grasp of the area. Workflow is something that is very important in compliance process, just processes in general, right? So being able to leverage a tool like Onspring in workflow, you're able to go ahead and create something that's automated, right? So when you used to have to take a look at controls in a spreadsheet, and then you kind of updated them, and then you had to go back and review them, but didn't really get notifications and things like that. Now you're bringing that inside of a platform that is automated, in the sense that you can review these things review these controls on a specified frequency. You're able to get notifications. You can include other teams inside of your review. You can kind of do all of those things inside of those workflow steps, and then keep that moving along, right? I mean, I think one of the biggest things with process is that I'll send an email. We're all really busy, right? So I'll send an email to maybe you to review, and you got busy and kind of dropped the ball, maybe. Where like Onspring can continuously send out notifications and reminders and say, "Hey, Tom, you got something to take a look at, right? So click this link, log in. Let's push this to completion."
Who do you typically see on a GRC team, and why is it so critical that a compliance professional literally go across the aisle to work with a GRC team?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, like on the GRC team, you're thinking about like the audit team, the compliance team, the risk team themselves, right? And, it's very important for compliance to, I think everybody kind of works in their silos and have their bridges, but to like kind of knock those bridges down and really work together in one centralized place. I think that with compliance, there's a lot of good information that risk and audit can use, right? And there's a lot of good information that compliance can get from those two teams as well. So when you talk about kind of a centralized area and a centralized location, compliance is, reviewing those controls, going through that process. They're doing policy management, they're doing control operating tests, they're housing evidence, right? They're, providing requests and things like that. Well, along that way, all of those things also become a little bit, like, become audit items, right? And if controls are performing not up to standard, those become risks, right? And inside of a platform like Onspring, you're able to go ahead and connect all those things together, and risk can be alerted. Hey, there was a control that failed, right? With audit in general, like your internal audit team, maybe they don't need to ask those questions that compliance just did. They just look inside of Onspring and they say, "Yep, this evidence is satisfactory." I don't need to ask. I don't need to ask the business owner for new firewall logs or something like that.
Perhaps unintentionally, so far in this podcast, Ron, we've focused on, I'm going to say, internal stakeholders, but there's a whole nother universe out there called external stakeholders.
Yep.
So could you talk to us a little bit about OnSpring's portal platform and how that facilitates basically everything we've been talking about, except with external stakeholders, and why working with external stakeholders is not a one and done? I have a contract, that's it. Why you really need an ongoing relationship.
Yeah. So So just recently, Onspring announced the portal feature itself. Onspring Portal is, when you think about portals and GRC tools, you think about vendor management, right? I have a vendor that logs in, they respond to a survey, they log out. Well, in Onspring's version of the portal, it is use case agnostic, and I think compliance is one of those use cases that really stands out in this. So what the portal is able to do is create a branded and guided experience for your stakeholders. So when we talk about internal, they're logging in to something that is branded and comfortable for them. But when you talk about like external stakeholders that need to log in, like external audit, they're logging in through that portal in something that is branded and guided and permissioned, so they can only see the pieces of evidence that they need to comply with, or will read and review, right? And that information can be collaborative in that one source. So what makes the portal, super powerful in that sense, is that everybody is together in a centralized source in a collaborative environment, speaking the same language, and they're able to work together as a team to progress these goals, versus seeming something that is maybe a little bit potentially combative with an outside source.
Is the information in the portal in this source, is it auditable?
Yes. Yep. Everything is auditable inside of the Onspring platform and the portal itself.
Because in a regulator's mind, if it's not auditable, it never happened.
Right.
Whether that could be an external regulator, it could be an internal auditor, it could be someone else, another stakeholder looking at your organization. So I'm always concerned with or about auditability. I'm
Mhm.
having trouble articulating that word today. So
That's a tough word.
abs- absolutely. Um, the I'm really intrigued by where you see all of this down the road, but I want to overlay AI into that and how either you see it, maybe OnSpring sees it,
Mhm.
something you might have down the road. How do we think about the use of AI with some of the tools you've described and some of the challenges we've discussed?
Yeah. So, I mean, AI is a really popular topic right now, right? Chat GPT, like that is a generative AI model. There's a whole other, kind of iterative AI model that nobody really talks about, but like, there's a lot of different models, and you know, that is a wild west right now. Like I feel like that industry changes literally every day, every week, every month, right? And when we think about AI moving forward from 2024, 2025, there's a couple areas of focus, right? One, how to use AI inside of your own company or a platform like ours, right? And two, how's it going to be regulated? There's a lot of different, kind of ideas out there about, policy and things like that, but regulation is really one thing that, really is going to drive this industry forward in how it gets used. So when we talk about regulation, like that's going to drive the policies, right? To drive the compliance piece of how we use this, the controls in place, making sure we're not leaking data to a different, leaking data to a outside public model and things like that, right? So that's kind of the regulatory piece there along AI and in the next few years. I mean, maybe there's just a chance that AI writes its own policies. I don't have any idea at this point. That's how much it's changing. But as far as what does it look like inside of a process, right? There's a lot of natural language processing and things that can happen that are really beneficial to compliance organizations, and they can use those modeling and to kind of pull out trends and things like that. So, but really, when we think about it in using it into a platform like OnSpring, it's really the beginning, right? And we have to be very careful in where data is shared and what models are where, right? And there's a lot of things to kind of think about and explore in that sense. But really, for me, as the director of platform, I really want to hear from our clients, how is AI going to be effective for you, right? Because OnSpring may have an idea of, hey, AI is really effective in all these areas, but if that doesn't resonate with our clients, it's really not helpful at all. So really, I mean, for us right now, it's really exploring what AI can provide and what it can do, and then mesh that with real world use cases and help the efficiencies of our clients.
Ron, we're nearing the end of our time for this episode, but I have a series of bonus questions I want to ask you. And I came across these in doing a little research on you for this podcast. And you actually live in another world other than GRC, and
Yep.
that's the world of esports. And I want to preface my series of questions with I think I have these numbers right. 69 million people went to a baseball game in the past season, 73 million people play esports. Uh, and it's a whole world that exists to many people like me, or I don't know how it exists or what it entails. So could you just say a little bit about your role in esports and why it is so hugely popular?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could probably spend hours talking about it. So a little bit of background on myself. I mean, in high school, right? Middle school, high school, college, I was drawn to video games, big video gamer. When kind of stepped out of that, started my professional life and really continued, like how I connected with a lot of my friends was through video games. And really kind of, that connection in the competitive world of, esports and things like that. I and another co-founder created an esports organization, which was, when you think about an esports organization, you are hiring teams or creating teams that play certain video games, right? With, in really, that can be a lot of different video games out there, right? So there's like Rocket League and Halo and Valorant, and the one that we were in, Heroes of the Storm, which was a Blizzard title. We kind of created that team, and then we ran it. When you think about esports, right, you think about these kids, they're younger, you go through contracts and you create kind of a business around this, but you treat it much like a professional sports league, and a professional sports team. So all of our, I guess, competitors, right, in the space, or the other organizations, our players received, all sorts of like what you would think professional athletes would receive, right? They had physical trainers, they had sports psychologists, they went through just like whole classes on how to be able to communicate in a team of 5, which I think is very, very important. I think just communicating in general, very important, right? So that side in that space, a few years ago was completely exploding, and it still is continued to grow. Where the space is kind of heading now is a little bit different, where it was really kind of team and organization focused, but these larger companies like Amazon creating the Twitch platform, or basically buying Justin TV, which became Twitch, and the streaming platform and these streaming influencers. Now people are creating brands around themselves. And these esports organizations are supporting brands. So they're really becoming kind of agents at this point in time, and to kind of help grow a streaming side and in a streaming culture with their players.
I'm going to actually take you up on the offer to talk to you about this for hours, but I'm going to do that on another podcast.
Sure.
And I'm going to leave you the question to ponder. What can you bring crossover from the esports world to the GRC space? You don't have to answer it now, but that's going to be what I really want to explore with you, because I'm just starting to explore that question too.
I mean, just a little preface on that. It's just teamwork and communication, period. Like being able to communicate effectively and efficiently in high stress situations or stressful situations is something that you would carry over to a compliance life for sure.
Wow, that's wasn't even the direction I was thinking. This is great. Unfortunately, now we are at the end of our time, Ryan. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted any more information on yourself, on Onspring, or really any of the topics we've touched on. What would be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah. Yep. So for myself, you can definitely check me out on LinkedIn at Ryan Lougheed, of course. And then with Onspring, onspring.com, you're able to go there. Pretty awesome website that we have, kind of laid out. You can do your own like use case tours and demos kind of through our website. You can request demos and times and things like that through there as well. We have a ton of literature and research on use cases that were created inside of Onspring that have brought in efficiencies to our clients.
And I'm going to shout out to exactly what you just named, the resource section. There are a ton of free resources that literally every GRC and compliance professional can avail themselves of. So whoever does that for your team, thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan, I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, Tom.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the award-winning FCPA Compliance Report. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. The award-winning FCPA Compliance Report is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.